What is your bad point? It's obviously Maui's turn now. What is your bad point,
Yeah.
Maui?
Mine is that there's like a greater picture here, and there's kind of a micro instance that we can hone in on. So the micro instance is that because Spirit is not playing all the events that everybody else is, like they seem, they're playing in this Bet Boom Dasha event right now, but they didn't play ESO Pro League, they didn't play Chengdu. It's gonna make, and I feel like it's gonna just make, and the big picture is that when the HLTV top 20 rolls around, there's going to be some kind of weird placements, particularly probably with the Spirit players. And we know that down the, annals of history and the way that people look back at and make judgments on the career of a player, so many people regard the top 20 as gospel. When teams take themselves out of events like this, then they have less maps played at the end of the year. And when it comes to Spirit and judging their performance, like I'd like to know and feel with certainty that if Donk doesn't get number one in the world, it's because he wasn't the best player in that year. And it is a reality that we're living in now, that because Spirit may just take themselves out of events, or it could be any other team, we're not going to have a fair ranking at the end of the year from HLTV side of things. And then it's going to be up to everybody's subjective judgments whether or not he was better this year than Monacy or Zaiwu. And yet but the problem is that when you're making these kinds of claims 3 years out, people may say like Donk was the best player that year, but then some, people are going to say, well, he wasn't even number one in the world on HLTV. But it's like, that's not really what we're talking about, because if you actually watch the game and you saw what he did with his limited sample size, he would have been. And it also it just kind of muddies these arguments and debates about a team that already happened last year. And like the big point here is that it's annoying and bad that HLTV's top 20 is regarded with such it's held in such high regard, but we know that sample size matters to them when they actually come up with their end of the year ranking. And one example of this, which is effective narratives already, and something that is what we talked about on like a previous show, is that when VP assembled this super team, people were like, it's not a super team. Jamin Flit aren't really top 20 players. The only reason they weren't top 20 players last year is because they had less maps than all of these other people. Like in terms of pure rating and what they were doing in every event that they played in, they were owning. They were fragging out. They were still the good players that they were in 2022 when they were major winners. It's just that they went to so many less events. And so the bad point here is just kind of the greater issue, which is that like you can't even say, like, you can't even really at the end of this year maybe say this is an accurate depiction of Donk's rating or his rating in the world, when I think HLTV, there's a good chance that Donk might just be second or third, not purely based off of the fact that Spirit has bowed out of events.
What do you think, Peter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a little bit something that I'm actually super excited about, and that's the whole franchise thing being removed next year. But I think one of the key factors of maybe them not playing that many maps is obviously starting off from zero basically. I mean, when you compare it to these teams who always plays these big tournaments and are able to play more maps and stuff like that. I do think like in terms of Donk and the whole subject of is he going to be considered one of the best players or not? Like obviously people will. I think at least for me, it's like just watching him is like definitely a top 3 player the way that he has been playing. But if he then ends up in the end of the year like top 9 or 10 or something, I think people will be upset about it for several reasons. And I think that's maybe why we should I think HLTV has like a monopoly on the thing of rating teams and players.
Sure.
And I think we can learn from other sports how we can also rate players, because I think if we were to ask every team if they have one representative by the end of the year, like who is the best player in the world, I think Donk will be pretty high. So this is like something that needs to be taken into account. But I think I think by next year, and obviously I think Spirit will be able to play more events, and hopefully also that they will attend those events. So yeah, I think my whole point is it is what it is basically. Like he's coming from a team that's didn't play these big tournaments, and it's just the nature of the game as it is today. But I think by next year we will it will be way different, hopefully. So yeah.
To me, it's actually Donk specifically that is a bit fucked by this, because if people forget, and they do sadly, at the beginning of the year, he didn't attend Blast groups. Like actually, him and Magix didn't play, and they had to use stand-ins. And luckily, they got through the showdown, so they're going to be at like the Blast Spring Finals or whatever. But that's one LAN already. You missed a bunch of group stage LAN games against real teams. And then you miss Pro League, which not only is the least pressure, but you play 1 billion matches. Like, bro, that's where you pump the numbers up. Like, the joke is, unironically, even though he was shit in the final, ZywOo has farmed himself back into relevance as like the best player in the game just by attending fucking Pro League. Like, that's all he had to do. It doesn't matter he didn't do that much at the major and he was all right at kind of, it doesn't matter. Like, that's how when you're using like sample size and rating and all, that's how these guys calculate it. So I agree with like Peter. Obviously, eye test wise, like it's easy to say Donk's like potentially number 1 or contender for number 1, and I doubt that's going to change. But I do think if you look at the way these sites over the years have done the rankings, it's almost certain, unless you really cook and attend as many lands as you can from now on, you can't be number 1. I don't think you can be, because at the moment, if you have either Monacy, who's in insane form in general, he's died off a little bit recently, or ZywOo, if he can get back to his peak form, these two players are going to be at all the events. They are going to go at the major and probably be in the playoffs, and they're going to play all the EPLs and all the Blast games. So the problem then is, if you're Donk, now you have to be like 1.5 times better than Monacy. That is asking too much. Like, you're just not, if they're going to go by stats, not the eye test, they are going to rank him like 3rd at a point in time, or 4th or something. I mean, I agree, by the way, Peter. Everyone will go mental and go, what the hell? What's going on? But then again, I notice people still to this day do that about the HLTV rankings, even though, by the way, it's a literal formula. It's just a fucking formula that you input the results into. No one sits there and goes like I did, but is this team really 5th though? Like, if they were to play these other ones, how would they do? And plus, even when they got that 7th place, didn't they kind of like skip up? They don't do that. That's why my ranking, I used to just say, is totally subjective. It's just what I think based on like how I evaluate the result. So I do think people always will think that it is. People do think it's not like, I've always said the HLTV top 20 is HLTV writers evaluate based on the teams that did the best that year, who they think the best players were in order. Now, the reason I added all those extra caveats in there is you've just seen in past years, if you're K-Serato and Fury is shit, or you're Flit on VP and they just don't get to many big lands and you're just on the ESL Challenger stage, or you're Nico back on Mouse Sports, they will treat you like you're a fucking bomb. And Nico in 2016 was the 11th best player. Now, again, all I'll say is this, Peter. Gun to your head at the end of that year, you ask every GM in Counter-Strike, right, name the 10 players you want in order. You don't even have to get through all 10 before everyone would have said Nico. In fact, he'd have been like top 3 guys. Like, everyone who was a pro knew this guy was cracked out of his mind. And he had already done it against a bunch of teams, but he wasn't in the teams that went deep. He was barely ever in the semi-finals, and obviously his team won fuck all. So it just, I agree. Maui's point here is mainly more, it's not just about Donk, it's more about how this will skew like the historical narrative. The idea is, if in 5 years from now, Donk is the GOAT of CS2, someone is going to look back and go, was he though? I thought like fucking ZywOo was better than him that year. Wasn't ZywOo still the best? It'll be like, well, no, but by the way that they evaluate who number 1 is, that's why ZywOo got to be number 1. So I get your point on that one.
It just muddies conversations, because it's like, to me, like, and it makes like pushback so much more like people can stand on something, but it's such a flimsy argument itself. When I'm basically saying is like, it just kind of brings back into my idea of like, like for example, the VP super team. When Electronic joined VP, I just thought, okay, instantly that's a super team. And then people push back. It's like, but look he's not even joining any top 20 rated players of last year. And it's like, do we have to explain this whole argument that the only reason he's not joining top 20, 2023 players is because Flit and James didn't play enough events? And if they had played one more LAN, then you now would consider this a super team. But you're not considering this a super team because of this one single hole that you're poking in my point that they're a super team, when if they just played one more LAN, you'd be agreeing with me. You'd literally be agreeing with me. Or if HLTV just lowered the amount of maps needed in order to be in the top 20, you'd also be agreeing with me. And so it's just like constructing arguments. And this is kind of like, it's just like, for people that talk about the game all the time, it's just, that's what's frustrating about it the most.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.